This is the Ra podcast. And we're talking Janibek versus Danny Dignum. We're talking David Benavidez versus David Lemieux. We're talking how we look at A side matchups, right? If you're just gonna have a matchup that's A side versus a guy that's not known, not at the level that the A side is. What should be the promotion strategy for that? And we're talking about positioning that you're gonna see in a lot of divisions in the rankings, people promotions positioning their top guys for titles that are going to soon be dropped. So this is what we're talking about today. But let's start off with Janibek versus Danny Dignum, and oddly similar to the David Benavidez versus Dave Lemieux. Even though Dave Lemieux's, I think, much more known than Danny Dignum. Uh, with Janibek versus Dignum, Janet Beck is even really that known. I would say David Lemieux is probably known more than Janet Beck. And it might stay that way for a while. With Janet Beck, who I think, and I've been really high on. I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, which is at As Raw Podcast, you will know that it's kind of at that point now where like it's borderline. People think I'm trolling, right? And it's turned into that a little bit. It's sometimes, like I said, it's blurred lines between whether I'm trolling or really believe the things I'm saying. It's blurred lines. Sometimes I don't even know what side I'm really on. But with Janibek, it all started from a statement where I said I think this guy could be the best middleweight we have right now. I think he could be the best middleweight, most talented middleweight in the division. Now, I said he needed to prove it, so that's just me on basically going off the eye test that I think he could be, but doesn't mean he is. Doesn't mean I can even make the argument that he is. Doesn't even mean I can make the argument that really he's top three. I can't make that argument because he hasn't proven anything yet. But I just saying off the eye test of what I've known and from what my knowledge of boxing and my years of training it and all these things from what I see from his skill set, I'm just not seeing at least the separation from the top three guys, which you're talking about Demetrius Andrade, Golovkin at this point, and Charlo. I'm not seeing a massive, massive distance and skill and talent from Janibek. I just wasn't seeing that. And I was saying that I wouldn't be surprised if he was the best one from the guys. Now, Demetrius Andrade fights guys at the level of Danny Dignum all the time, and he goes to decision with them. I mean, that's just the 100% a fact, right? He goes to decision with these guys. Now, maybe he wins lopsided, yes, but he goes to decision with these guys all the time, and as the performance goes on, it gets worse. Now, he did finally get a stoppage, right, in his last opponent, which was a C-level opponent, and he got a lot of credit for that. And people were saying, look, he finished the fight here, right? He's like, he proved that he could finish a fight. And it's like, really, no, he just got to the skill level of an opponent that he could actually finish, right? And maybe you think Dignum is the same guy as the guy that Andrade beat, whose name, escapes me right now. And maybe he is, right? But the thing is, it's not like Janibek handpicked this guy. He was just the next guy in the rankings to get Janibek up to a title shot, so no one could dodge him. So they would become a mandatory. So when they say you have to fight this guy or you drop the belts, right? Which Demetrius Andrade is most likely going to do because Janibek will be his mandatory now. And he doesn't want to fight Janibek, and it's not just because of Janibek's skills, right? Which it's a part of it, but it's not just because that's not like, oh, he did Demetrius Andrade, and I'm being 100% accurate here. I'm being 100% honest here. Demetrius Andrade, I don't think is scared of Janibek. I think that he doesn't want to face Janibek, who is a very skilled opponent, very dangerous for the amount of money that he's going to get to fight Janibek. Okay, so Demetrius Andrade is used to decent paydays, and if especially this goes to a purse bid, he is not going to get those paydays to fight Janibek. So it's high risk, low reward, low cash, which is the most important thing other than low reward, right? Like I don't think low reward, I think it's overstated sometimes. I think if people would pay people, like if you look at Floyd Mayweather, I mean, he just had an exhibition fight against a sparring partner, and there was no reward for that. That was just high cash, right? So that's really, I mean, it's cash. People say reward. It's really just cash. So Demetrius Andrade is not going to fight Janibek because the cash isn't there to have that fight. So I'm not going to say he's a coward or anything like that. Is he going to duck Janibek? Yes, but it's because of financial reasons. I'm 100% honest. I'm not trying to put down Demetrius Andrade. I'm not going to be one of those guys that now suddenly because I'm backing a fighter that everybody's afraid of him and no one really wants to fight him. No, they don't want to fight these guys because it's all usually in a business sense why they don't want to fight these guys. So Janibek is just eliminating a guy to get himself in position to force Demetrius Andrade to either fight or vacate the belt. And what does he do? And he does exactly what you're supposed to do. And so is David Benavidez. They did exactly what they're supposed to do with that level opponent. They didn't play with their food. They finished them. They did it in devastating fashion. That's what Janibek did. And that stole, that caught a lot of people's attention. Now Janibek is more known than he was going in before that fight. He is known after. And that's because of the performance he had. And now people really want to know how good he really is. Because if he was to have a long, drawn-out fight with Dignum, people would have judged him right there for not being the guy that I said he was, right? Or the guy that Buddy McGirt said he is, or the guy that Top Rank is trying to tell you that he is. He went in there and he showed that he was levels above this guy, and it looked it. There was never a point in this fight. I mean, he was even feinting him and breaking his ankles with just feints. He's a superior fighter to this guy. I knew that going in. If you listen to my last podcast, I kind of run over it. He's just a superior guy, a superior talent to the man he was fighting. And that guy needed a more, he has a more basic style that works at like a local level in Europe. But as you get to this top level, you got to have different elements to your game and at least things that you're elite at ability wise. He doesn't have any of those. And Janibek has a few of those, right? And especially with his timing, his positioning, the way he could fight from a lot of all three levels to me, from all three spaces, from inside, mid range, and outside range. I think he could do all those things. I think he's a very talented fighter. I think he has some good pop, especially, in his left hand. Is he a little bit of a little bit of a one-punch fighter? He kind of punches for one hand most of the time. That's where most of his offense comes, but he does have a decent jab as well. And he had the check hook on this fight. He has another little skill that he was adding, so he's still getting better. I think he did exactly what he was supposed to do. I think he got a lot of attention from that fight and from what that performance looked like. And now they're gonna use, these promoters aren't the most creative. I'll be honest, they're not the most creative, right? So now everybody's gonna say he's the boogeyman, right? This is what happens. Well, you can't get no fights because financially it doesn't make any sense for anyone to really fight you. You become the boogeyman. That's what the boogeyman means. You become the boogeyman, and that's the tactic they're going to use for him. That he's the boogeyman. No one's fighting him. Everybody's afraid of his skill and all that. When really, it's just no money there. But that's fine. That's the right way probably to go with this, right? So then you're going to keep feeding guys to him, and he'll probably have he'll be a guy that kind of cleans out the rankings because it's just going to be like next man up. It's going to be another European fighter who needs an opportunity, right? And will fight Janibek, and then Janibek will knock him out until he can, put. I don't know what position he could put himself in to get a big fight. He might, someone had mentioned on Twitter, Eubank. Maybe I can't see that. To me, it seems like they're kind of protecting Eubank, especially that promotion because it doesn't have a lot of fighters. Eubank is one of the guys that kind of base that promotion off of right now. That's kind of one of their main guys. So I can't see Eubank doing it to me personally, but I will go over if the middleweight bouts are dropped, which they could be dropped soon. That I'll go over why that is and what that would look like if they were dropped. But let's go to the Dave Benavidez fight versus Dave Lemieux. And Dave Benavidez is the man that I think a majority of people want to see Canelo fight next at 168. A lot of people may claim that he's this is the man that Canelo has to beat to prove he's the best man at 168. My opinion on that is I couldn't be more wrong because this man's never proved that he's even a contender at 168. If we're being 100% honest, he's never beaten anyone to really show that he is a top dog at 168. Now, I think an eye test, which a lot of people use, and I understand I use that sometimes too. I don't use it for my rankings or to say this guy's the best of all the guys, right? Like I say, maybe he could have the talent to be that, right? Like maybe if someone told me he could have the talent to be the best guy at 168, I would take that. But if you're going to tell me that Canelo has to beat him to prove he's the best guy at 168, I'm sorry, but he would have to beat someone to prove that he's in that talks of being the best guy at 168. Canelo already proved his point. He cleared out the thing. Whether you like the guys he cleared out or not, he cleared them out. They were the ones that had the belts. And it's funny because we respect the belts only when our favorite fighters get them, right? So I don't respect the belts ever. I don't care about the belts. I don't care about any of that. But if Canelo's playing that game but going undisputed, right, he had to beat all the four guys with the belts. He beat the four guys with the belts. During that time, David Benavidez didn't fight anyone. During that time, that's basically the only guy. Because if we people saying Jamal Charlo's not even in that weight class. Okay, he's 160 pounds, and in that time, he didn't even fight anyone in the 160 pounds that was worth noting. Okay, so yes, when Canelo comes back, Dave Benavidez is there. That's the only guy really left. You got Morale, but he's only has a few fights. I don't know what they're doing with him. I don't know if they would take a Canelo fight right now. I don't know what Canelo would get out of fighting Morale right now, but right now it seems like Dave Benavidez is the guy. If Jamal Charlo moves up, then that would also be another worthy, opponent for Canelo. I would like to see those fights. But Dave Benavidez is just kind of working to make sure he's in position. So when Canelo comes back, they have to fight each other. So he fights Dave Lemieux, who was, next in the ranking for the, I guess, mandatory spot for Canelo. And Dave Lemieux, who really all success comes from 160. It wasn't much success there. And he had some some losses that were just really not high level, like besides Golovkin, but like Rubio beating him was like a big surprise. And he's a guy that really depends on his power. He's not a guy that you really expected much from, even in the middleweight. So going to 168, it was definitely not much expect from him. But I gotta give him credit. Everything he said he was gonna do and try to do to win this fight, and he definitely went in with the mentality to win the fight. And I don't think he ever dropped that mentality, even in the fight when nothing was going good for him and he was getting hurt. He still went in there and was looking for his big left hook to change the whole night. And one thing I said going into this fight is that they were both going to get the position they wanted in this fight. They're both looking for a certain position, and they were both going to give it to each other to try to apply their best techniques and best positioning and best punches to win this fight. Dave Benavidez is just bigger, fresher, more in his prime, more physically talented at 168 than Dave Lemieux, and more physically talented than Dave Lemieux has ever been in his career. Dave Benavidez looked special in that performance, and he did exactly what Janibek did. He did what he was supposed to do to that level of opponent. Now, I don't think Canelo's next for David Benavidez, right? I think Canelo has 2 more fights in Matchroom. So David Benavidez, I don't think is going to wait a whole year and then might have to wait some months after that if Jamal gets the Canelo fight before him. So now there's talks of Dave Benavidez fighting Jamal Charlo or Caleb Plant. Either one of those fights I'd be very good with. Okay. I think that would be excellent news for the super middleweight division. I think it'd be excellent news for Canelo, because now when he goes back to fight one of them, it'll be really juiced up with one of them, the winner, coming out and fighting Canelo. Dave Benavidez, though, of everything I say and said negative, I don't really think I said negative about him. I've kind of just stated facts of that he hasn't really beat anyone. He definitely does have the look of being something really special, and eye test alone, you could make an argument that this guy has the skills and ability to be the best guy at 168. Now, right now, just judging from what I've seen and when I'm studying both guys, I would pick Canelo to win that fight, because I also think, similar to Dave Lemieux, Canelo is going to be where he wants to be in this fight. Now, will David Benavidez be able to push back Canelo and get him to work off his back foot, which we've seen Canelo struggle with doing, and is not a style that he wants to consistently do in a fight? Possibly, right? But he's not, even though he's a big guy, he's not Bivol big, right? He's not the solid 175er. And I understand that he makes 168 but goes up, and he's very tall and very long, but he doesn't have that kind of strength. I really don't believe that. I've seen people push him back, just physically push him and get him off his spot. Now, I think his speed and power and all that's excellent, but I just think that he's going to give Canelo a lot of what he wants to see, and Canelo will be able to counter him. And I think that at some points Canelo will be able to push him back, but I do want to see that fight. I do think that's a great fight. I do think that could be, as long as it lasts, a fight of the year candidate. Just because what both guys are doing, they're both going to stay in range. They're both going to look to counter off each other's shots. There'll be good speed, good power. It's really a picture perfect fight, and I think it's really building up to be something special. When you make these fights, what's most important is the pre-fight grade. It's more important than the post-fight grade, right? Of how good the fight was. The hype for the fight is what's the most important thing. That's what the promoter gets paid to do. That's what his whole job is. That's how they make their money, is the pre-fight hype. And I think that right now what Dave Benavidez is building up and how he looks and his ability is making him and Canelo fight getting to the level of like A plus pre-fight hype, and especially if he gets a big win against Caleb Plant or Charlo or whoever he fights next, or just keeps looking devastating as he did against Lemieux, people are going to be really pumped for this fight. Now, Canelo losing also kind of benefits that I think everyone wants 168 the matchups because it's makes Canelo look um, not as far from the pack as he looked before. He looks very beatable now, right? Especially how Bivol beat him. And I don't think that, casual fans or anything like that are really weighing in like, oh, the size difference or, it's just those things like that, little things like that. I don't think they are. They're just like, hey, he lost, right? He's beatable now, right? In their mind, when you were thinking of him, you were thinking like, well, I haven't seen him lose in a long time, right? Lost to Floyd Mayweather, but that's Floyd Mayweather. Um, and he's ran through everyone at 168 that he's fought so far. But now then you start questioning those wins. This is what happens when you lose. Everything you've done before now goes into question, right? It's under a microscope. And when you go into these fights now, Dave Benavidez, people are going to be able to make a case that Dave Benavidez could win, and the odds will be closer. And the perception is that this will be a very competitive fight, which it could very well be. But I don't think that would have been the perception if he would have went straight to those Jamal, Charlo, and Benavidez next and never fought Bivol. I don't think that would have been the perception. And I think that this now helps sell the fight, that it's actually a winnable fight for Benavidez, that it's actually a winnable fight for Charlo in most people, in a lot of people's eyes. I want to talk about, the matchmaking, right? And on both of these, it's not the promoter's fault. They just kind of fought the next guy in the rankings that was next to their fighter. But the result led to a thing that what I said before. There was a complaint about the Canelo undercard, and the people were saying it was very boring undercard. And I said that the problem is the promoter's trying to make interesting competitive matchup. And I think that's a flaw. I think that you shouldn't be trying to make interesting competitive matchups unless you have names on the undercard. If you're going to just try to highlight a fighter, one specific fighter, why don't you put him in there with a guy that is literally a can that you can get a highlight reel stoppage over? And that's kind of what happened here. Now, like I said, the promoters didn't choose these opponents. They were just kind of next in the rankings, but it ended up being that, right? It ended up being a guy that Janibek was going to run through. You get a highlight reel stoppage. Benavidez being Lemieux it ended up being a highlight reel stoppage for Benavidez. And that's how everybody talked about. They didn't talk about the one-sidedness of the fight. They didn't talk about the bad matches. They just talked about, like, look at how devastating they look. And that's what these undercards should look like on these mega fights where you can't really afford, high-level names or two high-level names versus each other. Give me the guy you're trying to build and put a tomato can in front of them and let them light them up. I promise you the casuals will not know the difference. The true boxing fans won't really complain, and they just will have a highlight to look at. It'll be entertaining for however long it lasts. And the next day you'll have YouTube views, you'll have reposted on Twitter. That's all everybody will talk about, how devastating they look, because that's all everybody's talking about today is how devastating Janibek and Benavidez looked yesterday. So that's all these mega pay-per-views or these mega events where you have the big names. Give me the guys you're trying to build, put them against cans, and let them look devastating. It works. It's a proven method. That's what you should do. I think the PBC's catching on to this when they did Gamboa versus Valenzuela, and they did Isaac Cruz versus Vargas versus Valenzuela, and Isaac Cruz versus Gamboa. That's basically what that was, right? That was to get the highlight real stoppages and to get buzz going, right? Like, look at that. Did you see the stoppage this guy had right now? And the stop and how great he looked and how devastating he looked and how unstoppable he looked. It's all perception. That's what it created. Right now, Janibek is a legit. Now everybody thinks of him as a legit threat at middleweight, and really from fighting Dignum, right? He wasn't even the best guy he's fought so far, but it's just because how devastating he looked against him. And people never even see Dignum fight, and they probably don't think they don't think highly of him at all. But yet, because they seen him get slept and killed by Janibek, now they think higher of Janibek. Perception, that's all it is, and they don't have to overthink it. I meant to pull this out when talking about Janibek and my man David Benavidez, who I've been called a hater against David Benavidez, but it's not the case. I just got to make the argument. When we get too far with these arguments of like, oh, he might be the best guy at 168, he's got to prove it. You can't just say that, right? He's got to beat Canelo, who I think clearly has a crown on 168. And at least if you're gonna make the argument, he's got to make a case for you, right? He's got to be a kid of the plant, smoke him worse than Canelo did, or smoke Charlo, or run through a guy that's actually a top guy at the weight class. You can't just do that from beating cans. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna allow it. I mean, we got to be realistic here, and I test be damned. There's a reason they have the fights. I did want to talk about the positionings for the belts. And the reason I'm talking about the middleweight title, let me get that one first. All right, the middleweight title. There's 4 of them, and they could all be dropped very soon. Golovkin's gonna go fight Canelo. Looks like next, moved to 168. That could very well be his last fight. Most likely, he'll drop his belt. Pull these boxing rankings real quick so I can look at the right stuff. Okay, so Golovkin will most likely drop the WBA and the IBF if he, retires or at least stops fighting at middleweight. Demetrius Andrade, who would have to fight Janibek next, most likely to me is going to drop that and go to 168 and go to the PBC and fight, you know, uh, Dave Benavidez, Caleb Plant, get in that whole mix with Charlo, right? So I think he'll drop his belt. Jamal Charlo might be moving up to fight Canelo, right? He's got one more fight that's happening in middleweight against Selecki. I think he might be dropping to go fight Canelo and staying at 168, where that's, all the names are at right now for the PBC. So in that case, right, what happens? So if you go to the WBO first, Jaime Munguia would be next. I think Jaime Munguia versus Janibek. I think Jaime Munguia doesn't take that fight, which has been kind of his MO going for his career, right? So I think he doesn't take that fight. You have Janibek, Danny Dignum, who just lost, so will drop. Chris Eubank, I don't think he's going to take the Janibek fight because he's ranked higher in other ones. Carlos Adames, I don't believe will take that fight. So Falcao, which would make a lot of sense because they're both with top rank, I still don't think he takes that fight because he's ranked number 1 with the IBF. I think that leaves Felix Cash. I think Felix Cash does take that fight. And I think that even Matra wouldn't even mind if that goes a purse bid and Felix Cash, going to top rank for that fight and, getting a decent payday for it. I don't think they mind that at all. I think Jaime Munguia versus Felix Cash makes a lot of sense. We go to the IBF. Now, Falcao is ranked number 1 here. He's going to take that opportunity. And I think you go to number 2 here versus Sarafa, the Australian. And I think that fight is made on Top Rank. And Top Rank would be able to, at least be the favorite in 2 matchups to grab 2 middleweight straps, right? So the winner of these could face each other. You go to the WBC, Adames, this is where he takes his chance. And you have Jaime Munguia. I think it was for Jaime Munguia would take this fight as well. I think that's not an insane matchup. I think Jaime Munguia has definitely, been protected. Favorable matchups. Not a lot of options as well, but him versus Carlos Adames makes a lot of sense. It's a fight that could have happened next, but Jaime Munguia pulled out. So I don't know what that's going to do with his rankings. The fact that he didn't take that final limber. So maybe Jaime Munguia gets stepped over by Eubanks or Marauders like that, who's coming off loss Golovkin. But I would just say Jaime Munguia versus Adames makes a lot of sense. It's an excellent matchup. It's probably going to be the best matchup all the middleweight fights we're going to talk about right now. Then you got Chris Eubank for WBA. I think that Jaime Munguia is, like I said, taking the WBC one, and that puts us in an interesting spot with Sergio Martinez. And that's right. It's that Sergio Martinez, right? The middleweight king for years ago. One of my favorite fighters of all time. Sergio Martinez at like 45 years old, I'm guessing. 46 years old. Right. Number 3, Jaime Munguia is out. Chris Eubank Jr., I think this is a decent sized fight. I think that a lot of people have a lot of interest on Sergio Martinez looking to grab another world title at this point of his age at middleweight. And I think the boxer would pay a lot for this. I think ESPN would be interested in having this fight. I think you would get Chris Eubank Jr., who's been protected, and they're trying to match him up correctly. And you can't get no better advantages than a guy out of his prime who's had bad legs, and last time he was faced elite level got destroyed, elite or just a high level fighter against Miguel Cotto, completely destroyed. So Eubanks versus Sergio Martinez is very possible for the WBA. So that's how this will break down if all these guys drop the belts, which I imagine a lot of these guys can drop the belts soon. In another weight class where this is very possible is at 147 pounds, welterweight, because I believe Crawford and Spence are going to fight each other next. And I believe the winner will become undisputed. And I don't think there's any reason for them to stay unless they're going to fight a guy like Boots or Virgil Ortiz or Keith Thurman. But I don't think that. I think that both of these guys are going to move up, win or lose, after maybe 2 fights, right? So if they leave, right, all the belts get dropped. How does that play out? So we go to the WBO. Now the WBO would have Boots, because I think I think Ortiz, who's ranked higher in other promotions, will not step up to this fight. So I think we got Boots. I think Conor Benn would back away. I think Keith Thurman would back away, and I think McKinson, who was supposed to fight Virgil Ortiz, in a 1 versus 5 match where Virgil Ortiz had to pull out because he got sick. I think he would take that fight and take that chance against Boot Ennis. Then you go to the IBF for Boots is number 3, and he just beat Castillo Clayton, so he would be top dog, but he's taken already the WBO route. Then you go to Virgil Ortiz, IBF. Virgil Ortiz is ranked higher in another promotion. I mean, another belt. I don't think he'll take this fight. I think he gets to Conor Benn, and Conor Benn fights Ivan Galop. And I think Galop has a fight coming up, so this could change the rankings a little bit with this fight coming up. But right now, as the 5 and remember, Castillo Clayton just lost, so he's going to drop more. But Ben versus Galop makes a lot of sense. It's a fight that I think they probably feel confident that Ben could win. Both guys from like Eastern, from Europe or Eastern Europe. I think it's just a fight that it's a fight that Matcher would feel very comfortable to make and to get a banner title around his waist. Then you go to the WBC, and it's the one I think Virgil Ortiz takes versus David Avanesian. Now, there is one thing, as I've heard rumors that David Avanesian will be next for Virgil Ortiz, so maybe they won't be ranked number 2 by the time these belts are dropped. But let's just say if they were dropped right now, you see Virgil Ortiz versus David Avanesian, which isn't a bad fight. Avanesian's kind of been built as a guy that people kind of don't want to face. Like I said, it's probably more of a money thing than anything else, and it's probably a very, maybe some risk, low reward type of situation. It's just not a big name. Avanesian's not a big name, and nor do I think he's some kind of boogeyman of these weight classes. I do imagine, I've heard rumors, I said this fight's next. It wouldn't surprise me. If not this for the title, I'm pretty sure Golden Boy would 100% take that for the WBC belt. So he leads us to WBA, right? Who has Stanionis, who's, has some form of this belt because he won the tournament and beat Butev. He's waiting for his shot. He's not going to get Earl Spence Jr. It doesn't look like nothing's going to get away with Crawford Spence Jr. So Stanionis will wait for the belt to drop. He'll become the official champion and maybe fight. What do I have on here? Keith Thurman. If Keith Thurman's going to take a chance at a belt, right? At any belt, it wasn't going to be Boots. It'd be Stanionis. And then they could position themselves for the winner to fight Boots, right? And then they could unify those belts. So you got to watch these things. I'm not a big fan of the belts. I'm not a big fan of, I'm not a big fan of, watching the ranking system and all this kind of all nonsense, right? It's like, it's funny because, these matches we just saw this past weekend, people were complaining, and that's because of the ranking system, right? For the belts. But you have to watch this because this allows you to see, maybe future matchups or how these guys are going to be positioned, or maybe not the chances these guys are willing to take because they're already in the top 2 spots, right? And why would they take a major chance and lose that spot right before the belts get dropped and not even have to face a Terrence Crawford or Earl Spence to win the belt? Those little things are very important, so you have to pay attention to them. And I imagine that these belts, there's a good chance these belts get dropped soon, especially with a lot of the when it comes to welterweight with the undisputed. There's really no sense to keep it undisputed at that point, right? Once you win it, why are you going to keep paying the sanctioning fees? And at middleweight, I just think that there's no fights at middleweight to happen, and these guys can't fight each other, so they're all going to end up going to 168. Which is very interesting because absolutely nothing was figured out at 160. Hopefully the new crop can, we can get positioned where they're all under the same promotion. These guys can actually make the fights, unlike what Matcher was able to do with Golovkin, Canelo, Andrade. Couldn't make any of these fights, or Manguia. Couldn't do anything with them. What a waste, because there were some really great matchups in there, but let's see how it plays out going forward. Thank you guys for listening. Please like and subscribe. Like I said, I'm on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Follow my Instagram at Ezra Podcast, Twitter at Ezra Podcast, and also on Facebook at Ezra Podcast. Like I said, please like, review, all those good things. Thank you guys for listening.